Hey everybody, I want to talk about arts and crafts details on your woodworking projects. Now, normally when I say that, we're talking about construction, things like through tenons, wide overhangs, crisp straight lines. But on a clock that we did a few years ago, both in the magazine and on the TV show, we incorporated an arts and crafts detail that had very little to do with woodworking. And that's this decorative art tile down here. Turns the clock into a little bit of a focal point and allows you to customize it just based on the tile that you use. Now I want to show and talk about a different technique that has the same kind of effect. Now I'm building a version of that same clock, this time in some straight-grained walnut. It's for my wife, so shh. Now instead of the decorative tile down below, I want to use a technique that Chris Fitch incorporated into a arts and crafts or a craftsman style box that he did a few years ago. And what he did is used some thin metal, in this case copper, cut into some typical arts and crafts motifs. So things like ginkgo leaves or these two oak leaves here. Now you can make the shape whatever you want, but you'll just cut it out with a fret saw and using some files to clean up edges. Now I'm going to inlay it on this little sandwich that I've created. So it's two pieces of white oak, about 1/8 inch thick, that are glued to a hardboard core. So I give it a nice stable piece here. Now the leaves are attached with just a little bit of super glue. You could use double-sided tape as well. And what I want to do now is trace around it. You can do this with a pencil. I'm using a fine point marker because I really want to see where these lines are. I'm just going to follow along tight to the perimeter of this leaf. And now when I pop it off, you can see the outline here. You'll also notice that I used a pencil and kind of colored in the veins in between, and I want to leave those in solid wood, so I'm marking those so I stay away from it. What we're going to do to create the pocket is to use a handheld router and a wee little 1/8 inch straight bit. So you're going to want to have some good visibility. Got the cheaters on here for this portion. And I'm using a plunge router because I have a pretty wide opening in the base and it's clear, so I'm able to see where those layout lines are. What I'm going to do is, I have a couple of pieces of double-sided tape here. Now it's just a matter of settling in for some routing here. While you're routing, you really want to pay attention to where those lines are. With an 1/8 inch bit, it allows you to get close to the line, and there's not going to be a lot of catching or jerking, so the router is easy to control. But in the larger areas, it is going to take some time to remove all that waste. Just go slow and work up to the line. You really want to stay inside the lines this time in order to have a good looking result. All right, here's what the recess looks like when the router is all done, and it's a good opportunity to talk about the difference between dreams and reality. Now, ideally, I want a perfect fit between my metal inlay and the recess that I made, but if you look closely on here, there's a couple of places where I went outside the lines, a couple of places where the wood kind of tore away from the routing. We're going to turn that into a feature instead of a flaw. So what I'm going to do, and what I did during the routing, was kind of fit everything in place, see where there was some tight spots, and then you can go back with the router and trim away a little bit of material. The nice thing is when you're working with thin material like this, especially like aluminum, this copper, brass, is that they're pretty soft. So once you get it close enough, you can kind of encourage it the rest of the way with a mallet and a block here. There we go. I mean, it's looking better already. Now to lock it in place, I'm going to use some Star Bond. It's a thick tinted super glue essentially. And what's nice about it is that it's going to create basically a dark outline around any gaps, which is kind of common that you'll see in arts and crafts tiles. And then the glue will hold this whole tile or the inlay in place. Make sure you fill in where you have any of the more visible gaps. All right, super glue dries pretty fast, but I want it now, so we're going to use a little bit of an accelerator here just to clean things up. Once that's dry and the accelerator flashes off, we can turn this blank into a tile. Okay, I got a little impatient and started sanding away some of the excess glue and the copper to make a flush panel here off camera, because I kind of wanted to see where this was going. Where we last left off, I was filling in all the little voids with the tinted super glue. And that's going to leave some pretty big chunks around here. If you have a carbide tipped scraper, I like this, the scraper from Benchcrafted Tools is a really cool one. You can get some of the bigger chunks off. And that'll save some wear and tear on your sander. Then it's really just a matter, if you have like a disc sander, an edge sander, you can use that. But I'm going to use a random orbit sander, starting with an 80 grit disc here, just to bring down all of that extra material. As you're sanding, let's look at a couple of markers to keep in mind as you're gauging your progress. First, you'll notice that on this side, there's still some places where there's leftover super glue in between the lobes of the leaves. And you'll notice over here that the wood right around where the leaf is still the original color and not this sanded color where the sanding disc has been able to contact. So you can use that as a gauge to see how you're moving along here. You'll also see the texture that the coarse grit disc is leaving on the copper leaves. Once you have just copper and your wood, then you know you can move on to the finer grits. Okay, here we are with the progress once we've completed sanding through 80 grit. So you can see the pretty coarse marks on the copper itself. We'll work through that. And then you'll see the places where there's still some of the tinted super glue left over, and that's creating kind of a shadow line, a little bit of an outline there. Could I have done a better job of routing? Probably, but this is what we're working with right now. So I'm going to start with 120 grit now and work my way up to about 220 grit with the random orbit sander, and then we'll check back in where that ends up. All right, after power sanding up to 220, I put some 320 adhesive back sandpaper on a sanding block and then hand sanded in the direction of the grain here just to finish things off. I think I have a nice color and scratch pattern on the copper here. So what I'm going to do now is take this oversized blank over to the table saw and cut it to match the opening in my clock. And then I'll take care of a couple of detail things, and then we'll meet back here and see how it looks installed. After a few cuts over at the table saw to take my blank down to its final size, I used a small block plane here to chamfer the edges of my tile, I guess we could call it, just to give it a little bit of depth. And now we're ready to see what it looks like on the clock here. And I think that's going to be a pretty cool addition to this particular clock. Of course, I still have to finish the face on here, but if you're ready to tackle a different type of routing operation with some metal inlay work, then I think this would be a great project for you. If you'd like to build your own clock like this, you can find the plans for it at woodsmithplans.com. Happy woodworking!